I hope you're enjoying the pleasure of Jesus' company and his smile today. I know that his favor not only keeps my guest refreshed, but saved her life in 1977. Melissa Ohden has become a voice for the voiceless after surviving the attempt to end her life and being born alive at approximately 7 months gestation. Melissa, this is not a story I bump into ever, and yet you have discovered a surprising number of survivors of attempted abortion. How many?
In my work with abortion survivors, back in 2012, I founded an organization called the Abortion Survivors Network. And really the purpose of that was to let other survivors know they're not alone and educate the public for the very reason that you're outlining. You know, most people have never heard about it. And in my work through the Abortion Survivors Network, I've come into contact with 174 other survivors. And 5 of those actually are from Canada.
Wow. Talk about the ultimate rejection and miracle. And miracle. Tell us your story.
You know, I always tell people the story of my life here in earthly terms was meant to be a very short one. You know, another child who lost their life to abortion. But God has taken that one little sentence and expanded it, you know, time and time again. And now the story of my life is so far from brief. You know, I've been given all of these beautiful storylines of my life that I now get the opportunity to share with people. But, you know, the brief version of that is that 36 years ago, my life was supposed to end from a saline infusion abortion. And, you know, it was just this past year that I've learned more about that abortion. And what I know is that my biological mother was not given any other choice. You know, we hear that word a lot, right? Choice. But we know that not a lot of women are given a lot of choice when it comes to abortion.
Your mother was a 19-year-old single college student?
She was. You know, my parents, what I know now is that my birth parents were in love with each other. I have no doubt that they would have married and parented me if only they had been given that opportunity. But instead, they weren't given any other choice than that abortion that was meant to end my life.
Who made these decisions for them?
You know, what I know now is that it was my own grandmother, my biological mother's mother, who was a nurse, you know, who I know she knew the scientific facts about when life begins. You know, science fits with the Bible. We know when life begins. So I know she had to know that as a nurse. And she certainly would have known what that abortion was going to do to the child in the womb, me. But you know what, like so many parents, when their child is facing an unplanned pregnancy, you know, I have no doubt that she had good intentions, you know, wanting something different for her daughter, maybe being afraid that all of those hopes and dreams that everyone had for her were somehow gone. But what people don't think about is that life that's being ended and the long-term impact that abortion is going to have on somebody's life.
We have a photograph here of the medical form that documents this procedure. Do I dare ask what happens to the fetus with a... Tell me again what it's called?
A saline infusion abortion.
A saline infusion abortion.
And it was. You know, I know a lot of people kind of, and everybody makes that same face, right? Like, oh, I mean, I think I need to know, but yeah, should I know? Yeah. And, you know, really briefly what that procedure involved was injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. And the intent of that toxic salt solution was to scald me to death from the outside in. And you know, it was a routine abortion procedure back in the 1970s. It isn't done routinely anymore, but you know, I think most people don't recognize that even though I was meant to be scalded to death, and yes, that's incredibly horrific, there are also horrific methods today by which children are losing their lives to abortion.
The fact that you survived this, and so many others have survived, well, I said it's a miracle. We have a picture of you as a newborn. Your head has been shaved. Man. And that was part of the procedure.
part of the care, actually, that I required afterwards. You know, that abortion was forced on my biological mother, thinking she was less than 5 months pregnant with me. But the fact that I was able to live, and I weighed a little less than 3 pounds, I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces when I survived. You know, that indicated to the person I was further along gestationally. And one of the first notations by a doctor in my medical records after I survived was that I looked like I was about 31 weeks gestational age. So she could have been almost 8 months pregnant with me when that abortion was forced on her.
Probably a key to your survival.
Absolutely.
Now, who rescued you? Because this was a failed procedure. Your grandmother was present in the room. She was a nurse.
That's
as
right.
you said.
You know, a lot of this, you know, I just love how God unfolds things in His perfect time. And, you know, this has been a long process for me. God has unfolded the truth about my life year after year, piece by piece, and I'm thankful for that because He knows what's best for me. And I can honestly say, if I would have been told even 5 years ago that it was my grandmother that forced that abortion upon my biological mother, if I would have been told that my grandmother delivered me there at the hospital and demanded that I be left to die.
Thankfully, she didn't get her way. Oh.
And I know people hear that, and it's extreme. You know, this is like the plot line of a movie, right? That's
Really?
what I always have to tell people. It's surreal to live this life. But I don't hate her for doing that. I don't. You know what? We all make mistakes. People sin every day. I sin. Every day I would suspect. And I don't fault her for that.
I said before we came to air, it's hard to imagine what went on in a heart and life that would think that way, that would be so intent on destruction. But you've been given God's grace to make room. The interesting thing is you were adopted, and you didn't have issues with being an adopted child until the earthquake came out of your sister's mouth. At what, you were 14 when you learned this, Melissa?
Yeah, I grew up knowing that I was adopted. You know, I lived in a home where we knew adoption was a blessing. You know, it's so unfortunate to me that we live in a world that wants to talk about adoption as being something very burdensome. And I understand that, but I always have to tell people living in these shoes as the survivor of a failed abortion and an adoptee, adoption is such a gift. To have the gift of life and love and a family, and I knew that growing up. I have an older sister who's adopted, and then my parents adopted me. You know, when they saw me, that little girl lying in the incubator with the shaved head full of tubes and wires fighting for her life, my parents fell madly in love with me. And so that's what we knew growing up.
And no collateral damage. I mean, you don't have any physiological, mental fallout from that attempt on your life.
I don't. And, you know, people can read about it online. I suffered a lot of complications, understandably, when I first survived. And the doctor said I was going to suffer from disabilities if I even continued to live. But, yeah, I am perfectly healthy today, thanks be to a mighty God.
Now, understandably, the question surfaced, and you went on a hunt for your parents. Tell us where that took you and what God has done in these years.
You know, I found out about being a survivor when I was 14 through my own sister's unplanned pregnancy. You know, she was contemplating having an abortion, even though we were raised in a home to know that, you know, life was a gift from God and we were all created in God's image. But she had fears, like so many women do. And it was her unplanned pregnancy that triggered the truth coming into my life. And I struggled. You know, as much as it was such a blessing to hear that God obviously had saved my life for a mighty purpose, the flip side of that is so much pain. And I walked through that pain, and God brought me through that pain gratefully. And